A Conservative MP narrowly escapes injury after opening a letter bomb, and he says, "I blame supporters of Bobby Sands." The IRA hunger striker is now in the 9th week of his fast, and the Tory MP, Mr. Barry Porter, thinks he upset two of Mr. Sands' supporters by questions he asked at a Commons meeting a fortnight ago. The letter bomb was addressed to Mr. Porter at the Commons, but forwarded to his home at Birkenhead on Merseyside. "I opened it," he said today, "and there were wires inside." So he immediately drove with the package to the police, who are examining it. They are now warning all public figures to be on their guard. Tonight, a relieved Mr. Porter was asked by Alistair MacDonald, "Wasn't it a little stupid to drive with a letter bomb?"
Stupid, actually. I should have put it in a bucket of water. But as I say, my first thought was to get it away from my wife and family.
Why do you think you have been chosen as a target?
Well, I think it's probably been a warning from those who are interested in Northern Irish affairs, and I think it's probably because I attended the meeting some fortnight ago in the House of Commons when there were some people there interested in the hunger striker. Bobby Sands' agent was there and his sister was there. And I asked one or two questions which apparently weren't altogether popular.
Are you surprised that you're a target?
Yes. Again, I didn't think I was important enough.
And what's your reaction now? Are you worried?
No. If they think that by sending me threats of this sort they're going to stop me saying what I think, they can think again, because I won't.
Bobby Sands himself was reported by the Northern Ireland office to be continuing to deteriorate as his hunger strike goes on. Members of his family who visited him at the Maze say he's extremely weak and that he nearly died last night at 8 o'clock. Today, his supporters were out in force in marches in London and Belfast. In London, nearly 40 people were arrested, and before the Belfast march began, police fired plastic bullets as H-Block supporters began stoning them. The demonstration itself, though, was trouble-free, as Mike Mackay reports.
It's been some time since Republican sympathisers marched through Belfast with quite this degree of support and this degree of emotional intensity. And it took place in a mood of bitterness and confusion generated by the breakdown of the mediation efforts by the Human Rights Commissioners. A red herring, an elaborate diversion, was how the Hunger Strike Committee saw it. The Irish Prime Minister, Mr. Haughey, came in for as much hostility from the marchers as Mrs. Thatcher. At the rally, the Irish leader was accused of implying the European commissioners had a quick answer to the dispute. And the biggest applause of the day was when the crowd heard Bobby Sands was now ready once more to die for his cause, an assurance made before Marcella, his sister, who'd made the abortive appeal to the Human Rights Commission.
The Archbishop of Westminster, Cardinal Hume, has been in Northern Ireland today, and in Londonderry, the message of his sermon was, "Love your neighbour." Brian Hanrahan reporting.
The Cardinal's visit to Londonderry was long planned, and it was coincidence that brought him to the city after a week of rioting in which 3 people died, and to the church from which one of them had been buried. He'd come to ordain a new priest, and during the ceremony he praised the people of the Cregan for their cheerfulness and courage despite the suffering. In an earlier sermon, he told the people that Christian communities should love their neighbours. It might seem a naive command, but it should control their actions. Cardinal Hume also had a neighbourly encounter with Mr. Ian Paisley on the plane out. They'd sat next to each other. Had they talked?
No, we didn't.
Did you have any conversation?
Well, like characteristic of travellers on aeroplanes, you just remain as if you sort of each getting on with their own business.
But you recognised each other?
Well, I certainly recognised him. I don't know whether he recognised me.
The worst spring blizzards this century have swept south and caused as much chaos as in Scotland and the north of England earlier. In the southwest, hundreds of thousands of homes lost their electricity supplies. Army helicopters are flying along power lines to find the faults. Because of pump failures, there are water shortages in Northamptonshire and Bedfordshire. 5 teenage boys are still missing on Dartmoor, and Army helicopters rescued old people and babies trapped on Salisbury Plain. John Norman reports.
Practically every main road in Gloucestershire, Wiltshire and Somerset was blocked this morning, with towns and villages cut off. On Salisbury Plain, police used helicopters to reach drivers who'd been stranded. Many cars became stuck in the Cotswolds, where high winds caused widespread drifting. Some of their occupants managed to walk to shelter. Others spent the night in their cars and were cared for by firemen who found them during special patrols this morning. 2 coachloads of old people were stranded by deep snow near Cirencester. They were taken to nearby houses for the night, and no one was the worse for their experience. Troops who were on exercise in the Cotswolds shouldered their guns and put shovels to good use on the hilly roads. Their efforts did much to keep the traffic moving. Large areas of the West Country are still without electricity. Gale-force winds and ice during the night brought down power lines, and it will be tomorrow before all supplies can be restored. Even the repair teams have been getting stuck in the snow. The loss of power also brought pumping equipment to a standstill, and many homes are without water. By late this afternoon, most of the main roads had been cleared, but side roads and country lanes are still blocked, and the police have appealed for motorists to stay at home. West Country farmers, already worried about their lands, are doing what they can to protect them after a local warning that there could be more snow and sub-zero temperatures tonight.
The 650-ton coaster Wegrow is still beached at Great Yarmouth, where she was driven aground by a gale. 2 young passengers were taken off by line. Tugs weren't able to tow her off on this afternoon's high tide because the water was too low. It may be another week before conditions are right for another attempt. It's been unseasonably cold in France, too, and the turnout in the presidential election has been lower than expected. The voters have chosen from Valéry Giscard d'Estaing and 9 challengers, and later it will be known which 2 will go through to the second round on May the 10th. A report from Michael Burke.
The French people were up early this morning, casting their votes their traditional way. It's a cumbersome method designed to prevent all chance of electoral corruption. The voters are faced with piles of cards, each with the name of one of the first-round candidates. After identifying themselves, they take a card from each pile. In the secrecy of the curtained booth, they choose one of the cards, pop it into an envelope provided, and emerge to register their selection. Then, more complications. They have to produce their identity card again, before, almost grudgingly, the official flicks a switch to let the envelope fall into the ballot box. This first vote is a luxury. There's a candidate for most shades of political persuasion, and if you have doubts about the president's record, you can vote elsewhere this time without the annoyance of letting in someone else you like even less. There are 10 people standing for president, but only 4 really matter. The communist Georges Marchais has no hope of winning, but he can count on nearly 20% of the vote. The veteran socialist, François Mitterrand, will get more and is the most likely opposition candidate to reach the final round. Right-winger Jacques Chirac is an unknown quantity. His campaign has been the most effective of the election. And finally, Giscard d'Estaing himself. This vote is the first real test of his popularity in the country. At the president's campaign headquarters, they've been getting ready to assess the results due later tonight, confident their man at least will still be in the running.
A short while ago, French television computers predicted that François Mitterrand will go through to the next round with Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. Only a few percentage points apparently separated them in today's voting. Prince Charles has had another fall from horseback, this time during a polo match in Sydney today. He scored 2 goals in the game, but was then thrown headlong when his horse was jostled by another. His tumble comes when there's anxiety at reports that he's to play in a polo international, only 3 days before his wedding in July. Jim Biddulph reports.
This was the Prince's last official public appearance in Australia before he moves on to South America on Tuesday. It was a fine, crisp day at Warwick Farm, 20 miles outside Sydney. At first, all went well for the Prince with an early goal. But then his luck changed.
Couldn't get the next one in, and it was turned back nicely by Maple Brown. Prince Charles goes on. Took a buster there from...
Although he's played 4 polo matches on this tour, 1 in New Zealand and 3 in Australia, this was his first fall.
Back on his pony, the score is 3-1.
Afterwards, he showed no ill effects at all. In fact, when he was presented with a book of poems by Australia's Banjo Patterson, he delighted everybody by reading out the saga of the mythical Geebung Polo Club.
They were long and wiry natives from the rugged mountainside,
and the horse was never saddled that G-Bungs couldn't ride. But their style of playing polo was irregular and rash. They had mighty little science, but a mighty lot of dash.
Jim Bidoff, BBC, Sydney.
At Windsor Castle, the Queen has been watching the traditional St. George's Day parade by nearly 800 of the Queen's scouts. It's the first time the Queen has attended the parade and reviewed the march past since the Jubilee celebrations 4 years ago. Finally, a Second World War Dakota aircraft has just started making regular flights again. An independent airline is using the DC-3 for its first scheduled service from Humberside to Heathrow.
Some years ago, this sight would have been commonplace at Heathrow, but there are few enough Dakotas left now for today's flight to cause quite a stir. It wasn't just with the sharp eye for publicity that Eastern Airways lined up their 130-mile-an-hour workhorse alongside a plane which has made a similar mark in aviation history and flies precisely 10 times as fast. At £83 for the return flight, Eastern are looking principally towards businessmen needing fast connections at Heathrow. Dakota Papa Oscar was soon off north again to continue a surprising new chapter in a life that began with the United States Army way back in 1944.
And that's the news on 2 tonight. Good night.